Now, are you ready to kick off your first speaker session? This is sponsored by the NCLRA, and I want you to get ready for Brian Clow. He is going to deliver a federal update on the ongoing negotiations with the United States on CUSMA. Brian, I know him personally. He is a seasoned public servant, policy advisor. He served as Prime Minister Trudeau's Deputy Chief of Staff and previously as the Executive Director for Issues Management. That means when there's trouble, you call Brian. He also looked after parliamentary affairs and very specifically Canada-US relations. He brings a deep expertise in trade policy and very practical insight into what these negotiations mean for you, for Canadian workers, and for the building trades. Brian, the floor is yours.
And I just need the slide. So, I'll put this up. Thank you all for having me here today. It's great to be here with great Canadians in the room to talk about this very important topic as we all fight for ourselves and each other, given who's occupying the White House down south. So thank you, Seamus, for that introduction. As was said, I worked in the Prime Minister's office from 2015 to straight through to the end of the previous Prime Minister, 2025, and amongst many files, Canada-US relations was one of my main focuses. Specifically, I dove into this file when Donald Trump was first elected back in 2016. We had to renegotiate NAFTA. We dealt with Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs back then. So we had to live through all of that together. Many of you did back then, and we're back living through it again right now. It's worth remembering, and why I bring up the first Trump term, it was not easy then. It was a huge challenge. But by working together, Team Canada, we were able to successfully navigate the NAFTA renegotiation, the 232 tariffs, as I mentioned. But it's definitely harder right now. The Trump team came back much more emboldened, less willing to look for compromise, less willing to do deals that both sides could walk away from and claim victory. And that's why we're in such rough shape right now. I will ask to go to the next slide if we can get the slides. If not, I'll just continue. I still remember the moment it became clear to us in the Prime Minister's office, and I think the whole country, when it became clear that this Trump 2.0 was going to be so much harder. It was precisely Monday, November 25th, 2024. Donald Trump had been reelected for a couple of weeks. The former Prime Minister and Trump had a few positive interactions with each other. We knew we were in for a rough ride because Donald Trump had campaigned on a 10% across-the-board tariff. What we didn't expect, but what happened on that Monday, November 25th, around 6 p.m., was Donald Trump put a post on Truth Social, and it said, I'm applying a 25% across-the-board tariff on Canada and Mexico on my first day in office, and he linked that tariff to the alleged flow of fentanyl from the two countries. As an aside, I'll just say that's a whole lot of nonsense as it relates to Canada, but this was the reality we were dealing with, and so all of a sudden we went from general nervousness and preparation to full-on crisis as Canada was threatened with this tariff. By the end of that week, a whole bunch of back and forth had happened. Justin Trudeau went to Mar-a-Lago to try to reason with the president and his new team, but Trump was totally unmoved, and he's still unmoved to this day. So where are we right now? First, despite the challenges, Canada and the United States remain deeply integrated trading partners. Cross-border trade in goods and services touches virtually every sector your members work in, and a lot is still going okay. But obviously the relationship is under serious strain. Tariffs apply to many Canadian exports, though a lot of trade that is deemed CUSMA compliant is currently exempt. But clearly there are significant sectors many of you work directly in that are suffering badly. Steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos being the main ones. Further, the U.S. is threatening additional tariffs through what are called Section 301 investigations. So while they've applied a whole bunch of tariffs on us right now, while they're trying to get us to come to the table, make more concessions, they're hanging over top of us this prospect of a whole new set of tariffs that they could justify legally under what they're calling Section 301. It's worth just taking a pause, though, to note the impact these tariffs have had. The impact on Canadian construction has been real and immediate. Although the tariffs are paid by Americans, steel costs here are up, you all know that, lumber costs are up, input costs across the board are up, and it's deeply impacting Canadian builders like yourselves. It's also having a negative effect in the United States. It's clear by all of the statistics that are put out. The U.S. National Association of Home Builders, for example, they've said that these tariffs add $10,000 to the cost of construction of every home. But even with that, and even though those are good messages to share with your counterparts in the United States, get them to share it with their politicians, Trump is still unmoved by it. He's so focused on what he calls reshoring manufacturing that there's a good chance these tariffs are going to stay, barring some major developments. Which brings us more precisely to what's going to happen in the next few months. I see we have the slides up. Yeah, this is the right slide. Can I go back one, actually? Yeah. How do I do that? Back. Got it. Okay. So it brings us to the CUSMA review. There's a number of flashpoints that either will or could be discussed as these negotiations get underway. Many of you will know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves and resetting ourselves on what the review is and what it isn't. So the agreement that was signed under the previous government stipulated that after 6 years in force, the agreement shall be reviewed. That date is July 1st specifically. So in theory, the countries are meant to get together on July 1st and they will decide to either renew the deal for another 16 years, taking us to 2042, or if they don't renew it, if they don't put a positive stamp on it, it will start a 10-year clock towards expiration. That clock can be stopped at any point if the parties agree to renew the deal, but July 1st comes, if there's no agreement, the clock starts ticking, and the uncertainty continues to hang over us. What's going to be discussed, and we have some of them here on the slide here. Some of these you will definitely have heard of because the President and others have raised them repeatedly. The dairy sector, the United States has real concerns about how that's managed here in Canada. A whole slew of digital issues. You may have heard of the Online Streaming Act, the Online News Act. These are new pieces of legislation that are meant to promote and secure our own sovereignty over some digital policies. The United States does not like that because they view it as a tax on some of their big companies. There's a whole slew of other potential digital-related issues that might come up in these talks, but we'll have to wait and see. AI regulation being one of them. This is, as we all know, a very big new area, it's one where the Canadian government has said they want to set our own rules. They want to protect children, for example. Well, this may very well be something the Americans say, you know what, we're not going to stand for that, and we're not going to let Canada do that. Auto rules of origin. Auto was a huge topic in the first NAFTA renegotiation. It's going to be a big topic this time, not only because tariffs are already applied to certain Canadian automobiles and auto parts, but it's probably one of the main drivers of this president's tariff war. He wants to see the cars that are made in Canada move to the United States. He doesn't understand why they're built up here, and so they're going to push hard to put in some rules that cause more auto production to move south. We've already talked about steel tariffs, aluminum tariffs, lumber tariffs. Those are all on the table. Canada will work to either reduce or eliminate those tariffs. Alcohol, for sure. The provincial bans on alcohol that have deeply irritated the United States, and the United States wants to see those gone. All the premiers have said they're not going to remove those alcohol bans until there is an overall deal, until tariffs go back to zero, so this will continue to be an irritant. Moving to the next slide. What are some less known, and they get less profile, set of issues that I think could come up and probably will come up in certain ways in these talks? China and related supply chain security. In the eyes of the Americans, they view China as their biggest adversary, And a lot of their trade policy is driven by trying to constrain China, constrain their allies like Canada from working with China, and they refer to that whole section of the economy as supply chain security. So this will come up for sure. The Americans are very irritated by Canada's recent announcements and rapprochement with China, very irritated with the electric vehicle deal that was announced by this government. And to be clear, I'm not saying it's they shouldn't have been irritated. That gives us leverage in these talks, but it's a fact the Americans don't like it and they're going to raise it. Critical minerals falls in the same category, trying to bolster their own supply chains, and Canada has an interest in bolstering our supply chains. This will come up in the talks. And just rounding out this set of issues, defense security issues are almost certainly going to come up. For example, Canada deciding to review the F-35 contract. This is another thing that has both irritated the United States but also provides Canada leverage in these talks. This will for sure come up as a part of this discussion. And then finally, I have this category that I call unknown. It's whatever Donald Trump wakes up any morning and decides is going to be his focus, which usually means somebody got in his ear, usually a high-paying donor, to say, hey, Canada or some other country is really screwing us here. We saw that over the course of last year. For a few weeks, he was very focused on Canada's film sector. Much like cars, he just didn't understand why films might be made elsewhere, and he wanted to bring all that production back to Hollywood. So he threatened a tax on Canadian films. He didn't follow through on that. He's complained about Canadian banking. He says it's closed off to American participation in a real way. Telecom sector, once again powerful American interests would love to come into our telecom sector and might use these trade talks to address that. And I even put migration in there because, and this didn't get a lot of attention when it happened, but there were points in the trade talks in 2017 and 18 where the Americans would raise with us their problems at their southern border. Obviously, the southern border, huge political issue for Trump and his administration. And sometimes they would come to Canada, come to other countries, and see if we could alleviate the pressures on the southern border in the form of accepting many of those migrants and refugees. And so I share all of that because these trade talks may go in directions and routes that some of us can't even expect or certainly wouldn't expect a typical trade talk to go. So what do I think is going to happen? And I would say this is, I talk to a lot of folks who are in the trade space who watch this stuff closely. And I feel pretty comfortable saying what you see on this slide and what I'm going to talk about generally matches what those observers think is likely to happen here. All of that said, there's a lot of uncertainty here, and this could go in many directions. I think the likeliest outcome of the CUSMA review is that July 1st will come and go, and there will be no deal. At the same time, I don't expect in this scenario that the current CUSMA agreement will be torn up despite the American threats. So the current situation we're in with tariffs on certain sectors, but a lot of trade, tariff exempt because they're CUSMA compliant, I think that's the likeliest scenario as July 1st comes and goes. That said, it's definitely possible, and as I've written here on the slide, possible, that a deal could be found, but I don't see that happening unless Canada makes a whole bunch of painful concessions. So going back to the list on the previous two slides, if we don't make concessions on dairy and alcohol and a whole bunch of digital issues and perhaps other issues, I don't see the Americans agreeing to do some sort of deal. At the same time, the Americans themselves are saying, and they've said, you've got to learn to live with the tariffs we have in place. So if they're not willing to lower the tariff, then Canada has no real incentive to come to the table and do a deal and make those concessions. But a deal's possible if those two obstacles are overcome. Very unlikely, as I just mentioned, is a deal where the tariffs are gone. I think nobody should expect that. It will take some miracle work from the Canadian negotiators to make that happen. Hopefully they can. And then two highly unlikely scenarios that I want to mention is a clean renewal, just the countries getting together in the summer and putting the stamp of approval on it. I don't see that happening unless some other changes happen. And even more unlikely is a full withdrawal from the agreement. There's a lot of bluster coming out of the administration on NAFTA, CUSMA withdrawal. We will see them threaten it. We will see them talk about bilateral deals. I'm quite comfortable they're never going to pull out of the whole thing. It would just be too painful for their economy. You'd see the stock market take a hit, which Trump obviously cares about. And the American administration is getting a lot of pressure from pretty important business leaders in the United States and union and labor leaders saying you cannot tear this thing up. So I think that threat is one we should be comfortable is not going to happen. So what does this all mean for you in this room, the building trades unions? I think there are a few things to consider. Certainly, if the deals go sideways and this shifts into years of annual reviews and uncertainty, investment in major infrastructure and industrial projects will slow. That's obviously not a good thing. At the same time, though, there are some opportunities here. The diversification agenda, the investment in major projects, the knocking down of internal trade barriers, all things that the government has really doubled down on because of this trade war, all of those present opportunities for more building and more economic growth here in Canada and taking control of our own agenda. You're seeing the federal government do that right now. A few specific things that I would advise you to consider and to act upon during this period, and I know your leadership is already doing a lot of this. One, get in and meet our new chief negotiator, Janice Charette, and our new ambassador, Mark Wiseman. These two people are trying to make a sincere effort to try to come to some sort of agreement. That's both good, but also a potential risk if depending on what they may advise or decide on issues you care about. So having line of sight into the negotiations by meeting those two individuals and their teams so you're not caught off guard by something that comes up, that is going to be critical for you. Second, I covered a lot of issues that are the flashpoints, but it's not inconceivable that there are some specific discussions in these talks directly about labor provisions in the agreement. The new NAFTA that we renegotiated in 2017 and 18 included something called a rapid response mechanism that allowed for Canada and the United States to zero in on labor violations in the context of the NAFTA that might be happening in Mexico. I don't expect that to come up in these talks, but I just share that because there may be new labor provisions that are proposed. People may want to tinker with the labor provisions that already exist. So keeping a laser focus on potential labor-specific discussions in these talks is going to be important. Next, I'd say, and I know you're already doing this to a large extent and the government is acting, is keep advocating for worker supports. There's been a whole bunch of announcements like EI changes that are meant to help those workers who do suffer from Donald Trump's trade war. Keep pushing for that because this government is highly motivated to not let anybody fall through the cracks or suffer because of Donald Trump's trade war. So I think you can achieve even more there. Next, leverage your relationships with your American counterparts. Many of you, perhaps all of you, have cross-border union counterparts. You certainly have friends and neighbors. You have relationships there. Make these arguments to them and get them to talk to their elected politicians. Get them to talk to the USTR and the administration if they have those relationships. Because, Canada and Canadians and the rest of the world yelling at Trump and his team about his tariff policies, it's not nothing, but it only goes so far. It's far more valuable and important to have Americans speaking up to their own administration to ease off on these tariff policies. And finally, and I alluded to some of this already in the form of major projects and building that the Carney government is focused on, keep pushing for that as well. This government continues to have a lot of appetite to follow through on their Build Canada Strong agenda to make ourselves less reliant on the United States and more reliant on ourselves, more self-sufficient. Just this morning, Mark Carney made another big announcement about how to do that in the form of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So if you have ideas that can get this government to invest even more in Canada and into your projects, they are listening, and there is opportunity there. So in closing, the next few months and likely beyond, they're going to be hard. The CUSMA reviews is going to be messy. The tariffs are going to keep biting, and the uncertainty is going to be very uncomfortable. The decisions being made right now in Ottawa and Washington in the negotiating rooms of these countries will shape the work and the wages of construction sector and construction workers potentially for decades to come. So remain plugged in and focused on this, and make sure your voices are heard loudly and clearly. Thank you very much.